Welcome, welcome, welcome to Jerry's Live. As always, I'm your host, Amy Gardner-Dean. If you are going to be playing along at home with us today, it is Acrylics 101 for beginners with basic supplies. To see what supplies we're using, you would go to the jerrysartarama.com website. You would type in JL89. It is our 89th episode. We're slowly creeping to 100, Katie. We're at 89. That's 11 more. Which seems like forever, but I mean, already there, almost. So if you type in that JL89, it'll pop up that list, show all the little goodies and odds and ends that we're using to do this particular show. Just so you know, I tried to keep it right around $100, kind of the $100 range for things you just really would need to have, like, I mean, I guess if you've already got an easel, you wouldn't need an easel, but a table easel at least at minimum would be helpful for doing acrylic. You wouldn't necessarily need the mediums if you're good about not watering your acrylics down. That's something where they're $11.09 each. That could take 4 things off, so that would lower the price that's in the cart by, you know, $44 and some change. So just as far as, a lot of people always ask me, I've always wanted to try blank medium. Insert medium of interest here, blank line. But you know, where do I get started? How am I going to know if this medium's for me? What's a good cost-effective way to try it out? Or even, you know, for somebody who's got students that are beginners that want to try something out, or their kids have some artistic promise and they want to, you know, get them something nice and get them into some sort of a painting medium. This is the bare bones way to do it. We're going to be using the Acrylics Soho acrylic set of 24, so it's got 24 colors. There are small tubes, but it's a way to kind of find what colors you like and then buy more. It's 12 21 milliliter tubes. We're not going to be using the entire range. I've taken the blues and violets out for the work that we're going to be doing today. Just a basic set of the Explorer brushes. The Explorer brushes set, it's the Pro Stroke Power acrylic brushes. The Explorer set means that it's different types of, like, you know, there's a small round, a big filbert, there's some flats and a couple brights. So it gives you a range of different brush styles to try out. And just kind of, this is a good minimum range of brush sizes and shapes for executing a painting. There's a set of 5 plastic palette knives. You can get crazier and get the, you know, the nice steel ones, but you don't have to, especially with acrylic. Acrylic can kind of pull right off of this because you're dealing with plastic. So it's not oil, it's not going to damage the plastic over time. So it's just a good basic set, so you can use it for mixing or, you know, scraping your palette, or for adding medium out of jars with it. I didn't put a water bucket in because I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I use an old pottery cup at home that's just got a chip in the rim that you don't, it was like a giant coffee cup. I hate to throw that kind of stuff out. It's still good, so I just use that for acrylic, because then I'm good about going and rinsing it out a lot. Then we've got mediums. We've got a medium in varnish, which means that this is your thinnest. This is going to be a lot like water. So instead of watering your acrylics down, if you go to do a glaze, you want to add this, because it's going to keep the strength and the flexibility of that acrylic rather than thin it out and make it so that there could be adhesion problems. So you would need just, I recommend that you at least get this, because everybody likes to thin acrylics down way too much, don't they, guys? It's just human nature. You want it to be thinner, and you think that that's going to be better for your lower layers, but if it doesn't bond properly, the whole painting can, especially with acrylic, I think in acrylic more so if you use too much of, you know, no medium, don't you think, than turpentine? I've seen some acrylic paintings where somebody goes to scratch a little nub on it and like a big chunk peels off and they're like, ah! Yeah, don't thin it down. So this is definitely one that I would say that you really would need. They make it in gloss satin or matte. I like the satin because it kind of tones the shine down a little. A gel medium is the exact same kind of thickness and consistency as most heavier bodied acrylic paints, maybe just slightly thinner, so it mixes well, but it still gives body and transparency. Or you can build it up on a surface, save a little bit on wasting acrylics by adding to it, and then paint over it with that texture. Heavy gloss gel, that's even thicker. We'll put a little bit of that out on the palette when we go to paint, just to show you. And modeling paste. Modeling paste, anytime it says paste or it's white, that's going to be your highest resolution. You can build a lot of texture with that. That's not something that's necessary to start out, but it's something where if you're wanting to do texture, it saves a lot of money on your paint, because it allows this that's at a lower price point to give you that texture either by mixing it in with your paint or painting on top of it. I included just the Soho table easel here. It's got little kind of bat wings that you can raise it up higher for a larger canvas. All we're using is just a canvas sheet here, just a pad of canvas. It's the Paramount. It's 11 by 16. I'm very messy putting the undercoat on, so it's all stuck together. But it gives you kind of a hard board surface. If you just want to paint right on there, you can pull it off when it's dry, as opposed to having to have necessarily canvas panels. All right, then we've got, these are just really handy. You can use the just the tearaway sheets of palette paper, but I know I'm heavy-handed when I'm mixing colors, especially if I use palette knives. I tear through that stuff. It doesn't matter how thick it is. I like the peel-off palettes like this because it gives you some high sides, so if you want to add a lot of fluid medium, it's not going to go anywhere, roll off your table onto the floor. But then it peels right off really easily. This is gray, so that it's got that kind of a mid-gray value, which they say for some people it's easier to see colors. I think most people, for me, it makes it harder for me to see, but it's irrelevant. I can kind of ignore that while I'm working. So those are kind of I think we've touched on everything. Oh, a spray bottle. I did not get a spray bottle out. Katie, can you grab me a spray bottle? Because we will need to mist. Unless I have one like behind me somewhere. I've got water here so I can pour it in. But apparently I missed my spray bottle. You always want to have a spray bottle. That's an absolute necessity. That's like painting without your brushes. You have to have that so you can mist your paint here and there. Keep that paint so the humidity stays. It won't skin on top. It won't waste a bunch of... I've got a bottle of water right here. I said it there. I just forgot my spray bottle. Thank you. All right. Now, some people are really picky about using distilled water. I will say that if I'm going to be doing a lot of big paintings, I will use distilled water for this, just because it's not going to sit on the paint for very long, but it's not an absolute necessity. I would say if you are going to use like an acrylic wet palette keeper that's sealed, using distilled water is a good idea, just because you're not introducing any kind of creepy crawlies when you mist your acrylic and then close it down, if that makes sense. All right, so we've got our stuff. I'm gonna just put some acrylics out. I didn't want to put a bunch of stuff out before we got started, so I'll go ahead and put the colors out that we're gonna use. I don't know if they can see this from up above. I'll be using Alizarin Crimson, Cadmium Red Hue, Azo Vermilion, Cadmium Orange Hue, Cadmium Yellow Medium Hue, Lemon Yellow, Yellow Ochre, Permanent Green, Light Sap Green, Phthalo Green, Emerald Green, Titanium White, of course, Ivory Black. I think I'm going to take the Payne's Gray out. The Payne's Gray is very blue in that, and because I'm dealing more with kind of a complementary palette with those reds and greens and warmer colors overall, I don't want to add that blue in to it. So I've got Raw Umber, Burnt Sienna, Burnt Umber, and Raw Sienna. Those are earth tones. You don't necessarily have to use those. I like to use this to take the heat and the saturation out of just a straight color. So we've got a little kind of watermelon slice here. And then I also printed it in black and white. These came from Pixabay. Just so I've got a grade value comparison here. Because a lot of times, especially if you're dealing with more saturated colors, you think that yellow, if you squint, the yellow and the red look very similar. This is actually much higher value where the rind is there. So I want to make sure that I know that so I can keep that light enough where it's going to look believable, because if I just make that a very saturated yellow that's not light enough, it's not going to necessarily translate, which on the screen it looks much lighter than here. This looks very lemon green to me in person. So, all right. So let me squirt some acrylics out here. With acrylics, you don't have to like go overboard. Use less than you think you're going to. For this, because I'm going to be painting really fast, I'm going to use more than I normally would. So don't do as Amy does, do as she says, which use less. If you know you're not going to get to a color for some time, it's okay to just go ahead and wait on that. But I'm going to put a pretty good bit out because I'm not going to want to keep stopping to grab more. If you follow me on Facebook, I've got an artist page on Facebook. It's Amy Gardner Dean. I wanted to thank one of our viewers, Cindy Lemieux. She, I guess I should preface that while I'm doing this by explaining why I'm thanking her. There is a kids charity down at the coast of North Carolina that's based out of Elizabeth City, but it's got a very large amount of land that it covers, kind of a territory that, due to that, only gets a certain amount of funding, even though there's a large territory. That is a children's charity. You can look at it on my website. I'd rather not go into kind of discussing why, you know, it helps, I guess, with children that are victims of abuse. So I put on there they're doing an art auction gala, and I've already donated 3 pretty decent sized pieces to it, but they're looking for even just small pieces. And I know as artists, we all do a lot of like works that sit around that kind of, you start running out of room to keep things. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna open this up to people that just I know that may want to donate their work for a good cause. So on my page, I've got a copy of pictures that I took of the brochure about the program, information just about when the gala is, and kind of how, if you'd like to, you can donate artwork to it to help fund a really awesome organization that makes being the victim of abuse as easy as possible, where the kids can get help they need without it being, you know, hospital trips and police stations and, you know, things that are not pleasant experiences for children. So, and Cynthia Lemieux saw the thing, and today she put in 5 artworks in the mail for the organization. So thank you so much. That just really means, it means a lot to me, and it's going to mean so much to the organization down there and kind of their mission, and make it possible for them to help as many people as possible. So, all right, let me finish putting this stuff on here. This is eerily quiet with you guys being so sick. They've let Amanda stay over to the side so she doesn't get what they have.
It's like the opposite of quarantine for me right now.
It is. It's very strange, isn't
like
it?
Healthy quarantine.
Healthy quarantine. Freed already rode my car with me, so I think I'm destined to be.
Yeah. Hey, just so you know, the white shows up really well on Facebook. The sketch that you put in.
Oh, of the little watermelon?
Yeah, were you afraid it wasn't going to show up?
Okay, well, good.
Saved for YouTube.
Okay, good. Good. Ironically enough, we're using a watermelon. The first, my grandmother was a painter, and she taught me to paint. The first time I had an oil painting class lesson from her, I was 6, and we painted a watermelon slice. So I was like, okay, well, it was oil, but still, getting back to the basics. All right, I'm gonna put white in a couple places just so I'm not kind of cross gooping my, that is a technical term, by the way, Amanda. I knew you were gonna ask, probably.
Gooping? Mm-hmm.
Yes, cross gooping.
Oh, cross gooping, I
Yes.
forgot. That's a specialized term.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. All right, so we've got this all ready to go. Let's see. All right, so on the piece of canvas here, I did 2 different ones to see kind of what was going to show up well enough, and I actually did some other fruits and vegetables as a test pattern. Kind of, there is, let's lean this back so the light gets on it a little more. Is So, oh yeah, that'll be a lot better. Okay, so I did a yellow ochre to see how well it would show.
That's darker than ours.
Isn't that so weird? Oh, it's much darker. Okay, good. Okay, all right, good. So I looked at yellow ochre and then I looked at burnt sienna. I liked how the burnt sienna looked as far as it will show some of the light colors popping out more, so it's darker than a mid-tone kind of value. And when I'm talking about value, I'm saying kind of if this were black and white and it was that kind of 50% range where it was kind of right in the middle, that would be a good value to start with. Burnt sienna, this burnt sienna is a little dark, so I'm not necessarily that worried about that, but maybe I would go with a little bit lighter one, but I just did it out of the tube and said we're gonna be good to go with that. So that, looking for a container to put this in. I did not get one out. I'll just dump it in the corner. All right. All right, so I've got all the acrylics out. I'm gonna give them a mist real quick. If the people that are watching took my AOC class are probably laughing because I was every like 3 to 4 minutes I'd be like, mist! So they were just like thinking that was kind of funny. If Stacy Clear is watching, I'm sure she's like now screaming it on the Facebooks. All right. There's not really a way for me to put the palette on here so we can see there, Katie, with that and the watermelon. It's probably better for them to see. Oh yeah, there's not a way to see any of that. All right, well, we're just gonna go from here. I'll hold up the stuff as we go.
She said she could zoom out.
It's up to you. It's whatever's, yeah, we'll just go with it. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I've got the watermelon here. I've got, you know, this is a very dark value here. It's pretty much, we're not gonna use a black, but it's almost like black. The shadow over here is, and then this here is going to be our lightest light. So first I'm gonna find those darks and lights. Now, this is acrylic, so you can just slather it on, I guess, for lack of a technical term. You can always paint over it, right? With acrylic, it's not like oil where you either have to scrape back or you're gonna have to go back in. So I'm going to take the darkest blue, green, which is a phthalo base, and I'm gonna put a little bit of ivory black with it. And now my brush is just wet, it's not, just gonna real quick find my drawing that I've got on here, kind of find that outer edge of the watermelon. Now, now I did the drawing on top of this. A lot of people always ask kind of if they use a pencil, they'll use charcoal, they'll use different things. I don't like charcoal because charcoal is very messy and it can move around unless you use a fixative on it. And I don't necessarily like the idea of a fixative on, especially with acrylic, on a ground that I've already kind of painted on that's acrylic, because I think that it could kind of give some, like, provide a little bit of an adhesion issue, potentially. I mean, I don't know that, but I'd rather err on being cautious and not have an adhesion issue. So I will get colored pencils. You could use wax base, you could use oil base, whatever, because it doesn't have enough oil in it where it's going to be a problem with acrylic. But I just use a color that's a lot brighter, lighter, like either a white, like on this I can see the white pretty well, or sometimes I'll use, you know, if it's a lighter color, I'll use a little bit darker, like maybe if it was a lighter yellow, I would use like a yellow ochre on it. Just something where it gives enough definition where I can find my drawing there, but not so much where it's gonna show really easily through thinner coats of paint. It holds on there nicely, but it's not gonna, you know, graphite can sometimes migrate a little bit, or just color lighter colors. So it's just a good idea to have something very kind of easy to use that's not gonna give you issues later on. Are there any questions, by the way, as we're going along with this?
Somebody asked, couldn't you just make all of those out of primary colors?
You could, but we're not gonna do that today because that is gonna take more time.
Also, I said, you have a 24 color set.
Yes, and well, and that's when you're a beginner, sometimes it's easier just to have some colors out there, and especially with the primaries. Remember, we talked about that last week with the color theory. With this primaries, you are gonna need warm and cool colors of your primaries, so that's already pushing you at, you would need, you know, 2 of each of your primaries, so that's already pushing you to 6. And then you've got the need for your white and your black, and then you've got the need for having some earth tones that can kind of help to kind of tone colors down a little bit, bring the intensity down. All right, as you see, rather than, I'm not like gently dabbing this on, I'm scrubbing this in. This is a good way to, it's not gonna matter if you can see a little bit of kind of residue through your, you know, of your ground there through. That's not a problem. What we're doing right now is we're trying to get some color on so we can start defining our shape. And these brushes are pretty durable, so they're not gonna, I would say I usually would use a filbert for this, just because the rounded edges help you draw a little bit more. But the filbert that comes with this set is a little bit larger than the size of what we're using today, so it's gonna make it a little bit more difficult from how far back and at a really weird angle that I'm standing at this, so that we can do the camera. We forgot Amy's a lefty, and then we're like, oh, well, this is could be interesting. So, all right, as I'm thinning this color, I'm putting the Satin medium and varnish in with it. It has, if you see, sometimes there's a little whitish kind of bloop that's happening as I'm scrubbing this on. That's just because it's that clear acrylic, so that will dry clear. That's not going to be an issue. That's kind of one thing, especially oil painters are like, why is there white in this? No, that'll go away, don't worry.
You didn't add any medium to the paint, right? It's just straight from the tube right now?
No, I did. I was just saying right then that I was using the, I think you probably having a little bit of a delay with headphones, is I'm using the Satin medium and varnish to thin it. The brush was wet, but I don't want to, I dipped it in just a little bit of water and blotted it out.
Gotcha.
Because, and what you want to do with that, when you start with acrylics, before you just dunk it in with your brush dry, if you quickly kind of get it wet and then you blot the excess out, it's going to help protect your brush so that when you go to clean it out with water, it's not bonded into dry brush, okay? Because the synthetics will, even though synthetics are more forgiving with acrylic, it will still go in there and stick down further in your, back up in here as the acrylic pops up, right? And if that's not damp, it will stick in there. And if I use this brush a while, it will already start to dry. And that's a problem. I don't like wasting brushes, so. All right, so we're gonna do what? We're gonna mist. All right, if there's questions, just holler out. As if I like take a breath to take a break, go ahead and shout it out. I'm gonna get a little bit of a lighter value to just kind of go over. I'm kind of thinning it down with some of that medium. This is just yellow ochre straight up here.
Somebody asked if they could use the same brushes that they use for watercolor with acrylic, and I said no.
That's okay. So it's a good question. Using different mediums with different.
Can you repeat the question? I don't think
okay.
that's loud enough.
Yes. So they asked about using watercolor brushes with acrylic, and the answer is going to be no. Even if it's a synthetic watercolor brush, you're going to have buildup in from your acrylic paint in the bristles. If you use that one time in acrylics, even inks too, I don't recommend doing that with inks. You will get buildup that's enough where your brush is never going to perform the same. I had a friend once that was using one of my watercolor brushes, a really nice Kolinsky brush, and put it in India ink that has shellac. So The brush is permanently like stained, number one, and the bristles are like this weird poofiness that it'll never get back to that nice point again. The same with acrylics and oils, okay? With oils, you need to recondition the brushes after use because of the solvents and stuff drying the brushes out, or mineral spirits, or what have you. So you need to replace that kind of natural oil back in the brush when you're done painting. Oils do get up even in the most, don't you think, Katie, the people with the best brush hygiene still have some residue in acrylic or oil brushes, and that's going to impede the performance in whatever medium that you wanted them for in the first place. So it's just really not a good idea to, as much of a pain in the butt as that is, dedicate your brushes to that specific media and keep them in bins that are marked accordingly so you don't accidentally switch them back and forth. I've done that a couple times with some oil and acrylic brushes, and I'm like, why does this brush feel so weird? And then I'm like, dang it, I used it in acrylics. Well, that's gonna just not be happy anymore.
So I don't have a great view from the island of quarantine. And I have a question about how you're thinning with the medium. Are you dipping your brush into the medium after you paint? Are you mixing it on the palette, or?
I am dipping a little bit into the, well, there's no way to see it because with the overhead. I don't know if, Katie, if you want to maybe switch back and forth a little bit between the overhead and the, is it, huh?
I zoom, they can see now.
Oh, yay, okay. Okay, good. So they'll be able to kind of see. I dip into the medium. Now, I'm always dipping in the sauce. Yeah.
I have no voice.
Yeah, she can't. I just have some over here. I'm always kind of, when I go to thin something, I just dip a little bit out and put it over there. I do the same with oil mediums. It just makes it kind of a little easier to.
Maria would like to know if it's a good or bad idea to leave the brushes soaking in soapy water overnight.
No, never leave your brushes soaking. Don't even leave them while you're actually working, because what's going to happen is the water draws up. You want hardwood handles. It performs better. It's stiffer than most of the plastic handles or resin handles. The problem is water will come up in here. There's glue in here that bonds your hair to inside the ferrule to your handle. It can come up in here. It can draw then up like a wick into here, and this stuff will start cracking and falling off, even if you just leave it for a short while. Now these I will say are better than others, because I've kind of been curious and like tested one that already kind of gets damaged from painting too long in water, and it turns out that it's pretty good. But if you left it overnight, you would just totally destroy your brushes. Plus you could have problems with the glue. It's never a good idea. Always have enough water to the side where you've got dirty and clean water, where you can actually get most of your stuff out when you go to change colors. Like that's already, relatively clean. So you don't ever want to soak them. Any brush at all. Not a good idea.
Does it matter if you use the same water basis for watercolor that you have used for acrylics in the past?
I would not do that, because you will find that you get ring around the rosy with it, or what was that, ring around the collar kind of. Get your whole wash clean. It's totally gets around your have ones for separate things that are water based. Even for ink, I've got a completely different one. I have a little pottery pitcher with a handle for my watercolors, so I remember that the handle goes for, and it's a pitcher. All right, so we've got just some color laid down. So you can already see now you've got some foreground, you've got some background. There's a little bit of some lighter value than this. This is reading as black here, but it's just that darker phthalo green with a little bit of black added in. Now we need to start kind of defining what we're doing here with our watermelon slice. So let me get a little bit smaller brush. Okay. Now, this is where I'm going to talk about, as I'm doing this, about the difference between, especially with acrylic, with student grade paint and with, artist grade and then up to professional. With student grade paint, you're going to have the issue of you've got your less expensive pigments will tend to be very brightly pigmented, if that makes any sense, because they don't cost as much to make. Your more expensive pigments will tend to be much thinner. Something I've noticed over the years with any time that I've had to use whites, especially that are, or blacks that are of more of either a value grade or a lower artist grade, you will get where, how we've talked in different episodes about, okay, nobody's watching me use my finger for that, but I just did. You didn't see that. We've talked before about titanium white is the pigment that punches you in the face, right? We've said that time and time again. Well, with student grade acrylics, you tend to get that where you don't have that strength and that punch. You want to actually take some white first and then mix your other colors in, because you'll have issues with, with your color absolutely overpowering your white, if that makes any sense.
Hey, when you are misting your paints, do you also need to mist the medium, or does it dry slower, or at the same rate?
No, I'm misting it at the same time, because if anything, this is thinner, so thinner acrylic is going to start to, start to kind of dry faster, and you definitely don't want that medium to start getting chunky.
Yeah. Thank you for that descriptor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it starts getting stiff. And I mean, even this here where I've been mixing, it starts getting stiff and it's much harder to pick up.
Yeah.
So you don't want to, the thing is, you don't want to like really hose it down over here in that medium, because that's a whole lot of wet that you're going to make wetter, and it's just going to make it so that you start mixing that in and having bonding problems.
What do you use to clean your acrylic brushes with?
The same type of soap. I just clean them with clean water while I'm working. Once I'm done with that, with the painting session, I will use whatever the soap is that I use for my oil brushes. If you're using synthetic brushes, you can be a little less picky and use more of like a petroleum-based soap. There's always people that whenever people talk about using dish soap with their oil brushes, I want to scream and then beat them, because that just damages. You'll take all of that, natural oil out of your oil brushes and ruin them. With synthetic, it's not as big of a problem. I still wouldn't do that unless it was something where I just needed to get something out, and that was kind of what I would get out, and then I would still then wash that with an art soap instead, just because the art soaps don't leave the residue that, using ivory, or, I mean, everybody says ivory's so gentle. It's still not gentle. It's still drying. You don't want to leave residue either in your brush, because the next time you stick it in water and go put it in paint, where does that residue go? Into the paint. Okay. Misting. And notice I'm not hosing this down. I'm just giving it a very quick light spray. Some people in class were like making it so that color was running off of that. That gets to a point of where that can actually start damaging the paint too. You don't really want to do that. All right, so see how we've got a nice light value there for the rind. Then we've got the dark background, kind of a mid-ground here. We need to start kind of defining that slice. And what's nice is in using this burnt sienna, even though this is an earth tone, it's starting to already read like a watermelon, isn't it? Because it's a reddish brown. So we're not going to have to add as much paint. If there's places that the paint doesn't stick, that'll give a nice kind of muted color under it, so it still makes the eye kind of blend it and make it believable. All right, so I've got a little bit of alizarin. I'm going to take a little bit of, I think this is the burnt umber, just to kind of tone it down. And then grab just a touch of white for this kind of little part that looks like it's been bitten. Now obviously we're not going to get a finished painting done. We might not even get this entire study done just because we don't need to keep these poor gals here. They actually, Frida and poor Katie were not here today. They came in specifically for this so that we could still go ahead and do the show. So we're not going to keep them here beyond an hour, but we can finish this and post it in the Facebook Live or the Jerry's Live group on Facebook so that we can people can see it. I'll even take some pictures of it in steps in between so that they're not missing that. All right, see how all of a sudden that just little bit, look how three-dimensional that made it look. You can see a ridge here where you know, you can tell there's thickness in that slice. You can see where that drops away there. Just with that little bit, I didn't want to use the alizarin straight up because that's very vibrant. That would look really bad. You want to add just that little bit of brown to tone it down. Put a little bit of the bright so you can kind of see, which it actually doesn't look so bright on the sienna. So that's not as bad as it was I did one on just the white canvas, and that was not as good. It's a time-saving measure right there. All right, so I'm going to mix up a little more of that. I'm going to actually put a little bit of the raw sienna in with it, and I'm going to do kind of these areas here on this on the watermelon. Put that up so you can see both where those seeds are, and kind of give it just a little bit of a kind of a chink where you can kind of see the. Okay, that's a little bit more vibrant than I was hoping, so I'm putting a little white in to tone that down.
Is it okay to use a blow dryer for a quick dry?
No. It's one thing if you're journaling and you're in a time crunch, because that's not a finished art. Yes, repeat the question. Good. They asked if it's okay to use a blow dryer if you're in a time crunch with your acrylic. What happens with that, especially if you're varnishing or you've got anything clear on there, it will hold the water molecules inside the acrylic, and it will dry over the surface. And it's not like oil where that can go around it to escape, because it's a very flexible medium. It will just hold it stuck in there. And what happens, a lot of people will have varnishing issues and be like, oh my gosh, I put a varnish on and it's so like, what, it's like cloudy. I don't know what's going on with it. It's because you've got water molecules that got trapped in there. Either you're doing it and it's way too humid, maybe for right then to be actually varnishing that picture. Maybe it's you did try to heat it up. I've known people that have gone and put it in the back of their cars when it's hot and closed the doors and left it out in the car to try to dry it. I've known people that have put it in their oven. These materials are designed to work a specific way. They're not designed to be like, oh, but this would work, but that would work. The manufacturer would tell you if that's the way that you should use it. So, you know, better to air. This is way faster than oils. If you're too impatient to wait for this, maybe you need to be doing watercolor. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, it's just not, you don't want to be doing that. It can, all the hard work that you're putting into your painting, it could backfire and you know, really mess with it. So not a good idea.
Do you always mix colors with the brush you're painting with?
I do. I don't use a palette knife. She asked if, and that's okay, so she asked if I always mix with the brush. I'm not, if this was a 4 foot by 8 foot painting, I would definitely be mixing with a palette knife first and really, you know, mixing a large amount of color. This is only 12 by 16. This is very small. It's smaller than probably I usually paint unless it's for work. So I'm only making small corrections and additions and all that while I'm working. So it's easier for me to control it with little dabs of color here and there. If I was doing this with a palette knife, I would get way too much of one thing and then would either have to wipe it off and start over, or, you know, keep tweaking it and end up with more paint than I really wanted.
Mist.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Missed. All right. So let's try to start getting some of the, I think this is the Easel Vermilion. You can see when we add a little bit of white, how this is starting to kind of tone this down, making a nice little color. All right, I guess we're not toning. There's no gray in this. It's just, all right. So this is really light. This is going to be, if you squint with the value against this here, this is going to be very similar to the value of this. So I'm gonna get a lot of the fluid media pulled over here. And I'm gonna go along the side here. Now this is really thin because I've really essentially watered that down with the medium. It's not water, watered it down with the medium. I am employing the brush in strokes like the tissue of that watermelon is going. It comes out like this. You can almost see kind of that threadiness of the body of the watermelon. So I'm going to do this just in places that I want it to be a little bit lighter. Can I kind of put a lighter light against that very dark, just to kind of see how that little bit made that this darker pot like flatten out, and then it emphasized that against the dark. I'm gonna do that with this here.
Eli was wondering if it's okay to use both golden and Liquitex acrylics and mix them in the same painting.
Okay, there's never a problem with, as long as it's acrylic. Where I would say that Eli's asked if you can use different brands. He used golden and Liquitex as an example, but if you can use different brands in the same painting, there's never an issue with that. Even with student grade, with professional grade, the issue that you're going to have the most of is what are the qualities of the paints against each other. If you're using golden and Liquitex, those are two professional grade acrylics, so they're going to perform very similar. Okay, they might treat the pigments a little differently. Just know what each color looks like that you've got that you're applying. The biggest issue would be if you used an open acrylic, which means it's got a retarder in it, so the drying is slower, and a traditional acrylic. You would want to definitely put some retarder in with your traditional acrylic, and maybe not mix the two together, because it's going to give you very strange dry times. So it would be difficult to judge on your painting kind of as you're working along where it's, you know, dry, where it's not, without actually putting the brush over it and potentially picking up some of the painting that you don't want, you know, to come up, if that makes any sense. Oh, and you know what, with all the deep freeze here in the United States, I want to address an issue that that the Director of Customer Service, Stephen Gilmore, and I were discussing. Acrylic paint freezes. Just because you've actually ordered the paint and it's, say, you know, a balmy 40 degrees where you are in Wisconsin, does not mean that for the paint to get to you from North Carolina in the time that it takes to get there, that it may not have multiple freeze cycles. The trucks are not heated and they're not air conditioned. With the heat's not going to be an issue with the acrylic in the summer. The issue is with freezing. Not all brands have been designed to be able to handle a freeze thaw. I think that Golden's last technical thing said up to 7 to 8 freeze thaws, but you know what, still don't do that. What if the truck's going here and there? What if you're in California or Oregon or, you know, Washington State, and depending on the way the trip goes, it's had a freeze thaw a bunch of times. What happens is it damages the resin. It makes it so the acrylic paint very much so, unfortunately, resembles the texture of very fine-grained cottage cheese. And it's not going to be, and people are like, well, what do I do? It's not, there's nothing to do. even if you mix it a lot, it's still gonna be somewhat ropey. You don't want to order, unfortunately, acrylic painters, you need to think about what your weather conditions are and where you're ordering something from before you order acrylics in the winter, to ensure that when there's a warm snap, when there's going to be ample time, look at the shipping on the website or call customer service where you're ordering from and make sure that there's going to be ample time to get your products to you before it starts freezing back up again.
And that's not as much of an issue with oils, correct?
It can happen with oils, but it's much less. That's more like if you were up in Alaska and leaving it out, you know, kind of thing. Or it's not anywhere that it's the resins with the acrylic that are the problem.
Why are you thinning with the medium versus the just using water?
Real quick before that, keep in mind that most of our orders, when they ship out via UPS, go through the Kentucky hub.
Yep.
So if it's cold in Kentucky, you may want to hold off on your orders. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
That's a good point.
That's nothing wrong with that. All right, so she asked, why am I thinning with medium instead of water? If you've not seen an acrylics episode with us, you know, this is probably why you're asking this question. Acrylic resin is what the medium is that binds the pigment in acrylic. Okay, with oil, it's linseed oil or walnut oil, whatever kind of oil it is. With watercolor, it's gum arabic that binds the pigment to each other. With acrylic, it is the resin, the plastic, you know, essentially when it boils down to it, it's a polymer, it's a plastic. If you are taking a plastic that's liquid and you're adding a whole lot of water, you are breaking the molecular bonds of the resin and the pigment together to thin it out to a brushable consistency, or a consistency where you're able to work in a thin manner. And what's going to happen is when that dries over paint that's already painted on very thick, it's not going to stick, or it's going to stick but very, very barely. Then if you go back on with heavier paint, it may pick up. It may wait until later when you've got, you know, warmer temperatures in your studio. You might have a little nick on the surface and you fiddle with it with your fingernail, and all of a sudden a big piece peels off. You don't want to thin with water more than just wetting your brush and maybe adding a tiny little bit to a heavy-bodied acrylic. Beyond that, this is the texture of water, but it's resin. It's a fluid resin. It's going to help you bond those together, where each layer is going to stick to the next and stick to the next, and it's going to give you the best adhesion in your painting. This is when people talk about archival, they don't just mean is the oil going to eat through something. Archival means, is this painting going to stand the test of time? Is it going to last? This is an archival issue with acrylics, and it's something that a lot of acrylic painters don't realize. And, you know, especially people that have, you know, modern artists that have painted in with house paint and things like that, they are starting to have issues with that because there's not enough resin, high enough resin counts in that, and museums are working frantically to try to get, you know, when they do any touch-up work and stuff on them, make it so that it is more archival when the artist did not make it such by how they painted the painting.
If money wasn't an issue for acrylics, what would be your #1 brands for brushes and paints?
Like somebody said, hey, here's a store, go hog wild.
Yeah.
That's really going to be very dependent on the particular artist. I'll say, how about this? I'll say what I've worked in and what I've liked, because I haven't used every single brand. When I started from oil to acrylics, I worked with Golden, and I really liked Golden. I've worked with Matisse, really liked it. It's just a little bit more matte, which I don't always enjoy. I like a little bit of gloss to it. I've worked in Liquitex, I like that. I've used Lucas. Lucas actually used to make a heavier bodied paint called Pastos that I really liked. And it just wasn't popular enough because it was thicker than most heavy bodied paints. I've used May Mary, used to have one called Brera that I really liked, that I don't think that they produce anymore, that was an artist grade acrylic. I've used most Charvin. Love Charvin acrylics. I've got a drawer full of those at home.
Especially linen flower.
Yes. So it's just more kind of what works with the palette that I'm working on than so much. As long as it's a good quality brand and I've used it and I've had good results with it, I don't go let me mix and match. And everybody knows that I do like the Sennelier structure where it's got the pouches. Yes, the abstract. That's a nice, yes.
Do you would not mist your substrate, right? You're just misting.
No, oh God, no. We, you know, I'm glad you said that. Don't mist your substrate because you're already starting to set yourself up for the adhesion not to be proper. We had people in class that did not realize that, and we're over there and I was like, that's really strange. Wonder why is that watercolor effect as it's kind of starting to pour off the canvas, and I was like, no, don't, let's not do that. Let's not do that anymore. Don't do that. So no, only your surface. That's a good question.
Do you have to seal a final acrylic painting?
Yes, you want to varnish an acrylic painting. Whatever you want to do it with, you know, whether it's removable or whether it's not removable is your choice. But acrylic is although it's a plastic, it's still a very soft medium. Everybody knows that plastic is, you know, porous, right? The biggest issue I've found just with having dogs, and I prefer painting as opposed to housekeeping, dust, because it's a porous and it's a very soft surface. Dust and dirt and hair, dog hair, really stick to the, and you guys are like, why are your paintings not on the wall? Well, when you've got a lot of them, not all of them are on the wall. Some are on a floor or, you know, in a closet or whatever, and there's tumbleweeds through the house sometimes. You need to protect that surface so that it could be, if it gets dusty or dirty or Great Dane slobbery, you know, in the hall when they shake, that you can actually clean that painting without damaging the surface of the actual painting itself, right? You can either remove that varnish and clean it, or if it's a non-removable varnish, at least it's giving you a surface to then clean. But always, always, always put a varnish on it. I've heard people with an argument for not doing it, and I will offer this as the story too. There was a friend that's a painter had a client who had a house fire. Thankfully, they got the animals and everything out. Only part of the house burned, and the part that burned was in a different part of the house, but obviously smoke damage rolls through the entire house, right? And the painting was incredibly smoke damaged. Thankfully, they had put a removable varnish on it, and it was of like, I think Dobermans or something like that, that the lady had. And they were able to remove the varnish and clean it all up, and the painting was, they revarnished it, and the painting was good as new. Had they not had that, then, you know, or even had a removable varnish, that would have been stuck on there. Yes, Frida.
2 questions. What do you think about Atelier Interactive Acrylic? And is the Studio Medium varnish that you've got up there the same as Golden's GAC 100?
No, GAC 100 is a sealant. It is not a varnish. You can add it to, she asked about GAC 100 if this medium was the same as GAC 100. GAC 100 can be used to thin a painting. It is more viscous than this is. It's really more of a sealer that's supposed to keep, you know, seal a substrate, or if you're looking for a thicker, more viscous thing to add to paints just to thin them, and that's what you've got, I would not use GAC 100 to thin my paints with at all. Have it in the studio, tried using it once. It's got it compared to this being more like water. It's got kind of almost like a syrupy texture. Not obviously it's not just like honey, but it's much thicker. So it just doesn't work for giving you that same flow to it. for thinning that down. Now, interactive acrylics, I don't know. I've never used them. I've used some other products from that company, and I was not really impressed one way or the other, where it was like, oh my God, I must use this, or God, this is horrible. It just didn't do anything for me. And interactive acrylics are the same thing as, it's just an acrylic with a retarder. It's like Golden's Open Acrylic, just a different brand. Do we have any other questions? We're kind of getting close to time, so I'm gonna put a little bit of these seeds on here, and then we'll post the picture later. So go ahead and grab questions if you've got other ones. Yeah. So with the seeds, I'm just adding a little bit of burnt umber in with that darkest green that's in the back. You know, this is where I will choke up on a brush, and what choke up means is that I'm getting, see how I'm getting close up to the end there? Because the angle that this canvas is at is kind of difficult for me to lean over and work against. So with something like this where it's seeds, I would do the darkest dark first, because then I can go back in and do the highlights after the fact. Are there any other questions before we end, just on acrylic as a medium?
Well, what if
or
you get your acrylic too soupy?
too soupy with water, or too soupy with the medium itself?
Just this soupy.
If your acrylic is watered down too far and you're not happy with it, you can always add a little bit more color in there with it, or, I mean, you'll know not to do that again. Wipe it up and, you know, remix. It's just, it happens. It happens to me sometimes. I'll put it on and it'll start to run. I'll be like, ah, no. I generally just take a little bit more of that. Or you could, if you're not worried about it being transparent, you could always use a little bit of a gel medium with it, something that's thicker to thicken it up. But again, anytime you add mediums on top of, you know, paint, you're adding something that's thinning the color. And if you're already starting with a student grade or a value grade, kind of a lower end artist grade where it doesn't have as strong of a pigmentation, you're going to be thinning that color out.
Can the Jerry's gloss varnish be used to thin paints, or is it just for finishing the piece?
The Jerry's does not make a removable varnish, okay? This is a medium and varnish, meaning that you can use it to thin your acrylics, or you can put several coats on top of it. As a varnish, you would want to probably do 3 to 4 coats if you're using a medium and varnish, just to make sure that there's a thick enough distance between that painting and the outside of it. But this is not a just straight up varnish. If something just says varnish, you know, always read the fine print, make sure it's removable, but usually if it just says varnish, it is removable. So it's something that they don't ever like really explain to people, and then you're like, you know, oh my. The nice thing about a medium and varnish is if you notice something like in there that's all gross and nasty, you can paint over it, a color that you got wrong. You know, you're doing a portrait and you painted the kid's eyes brown because you didn't know, and their eyes are blue because maybe the pictures the person provided, you know, you aren't that great. It's a way where you can go ahead and paint right over it because it's a medium and varnish, so it's still paintable. And finish it and then just revarnish it, but you know, and not have to take off another varnish and do all that, but you know, it is still not just a straight up varnish. Any other last questions? I don't want to keep these poor gals here. They've been champs. You guys need to thank them for, I don't even know why you guys came in. I don't know how Amanda would have been able to manage this all by herself.
She wouldn't have.
But
it would be on my iPhone.
Yes.
Somehow.
Yes, and we might have had a very unhappy Ming that would have had to jump in and help. But they went above and beyond the call of duty with coming in today. So I'm sorry, ladies, that you guys are sick and you need to get better. and not have given it to Amanda and I.
Yeah.
Besides.
My birthday is next week.
Yeah.
You cannot have given
Yeah.
it to me.
Oh, it's the gift that keeps on giving. The flu.
That's why you're sequestered and alienated
Yep.
right now.
Yep. All right, so no other questions that you guys have? All right, well then I will finish this. We'll take some pictures. If you're not a member of the Jerry's Live group and you want to follow along with this, you're probably gonna need to become a member of the Jerry's Live group. You go to the groups, you look up Jerry's Live. You have to answer the question. When you apply, they send you a question. If you don't answer the question,
You just sit there.
yeah, you're in perpetual art group purgatory. You will not pass go. Collect $200. Get to the beauty of the other side that is the Jerry's Live group. So once you're in the group, though, you can post pictures of your work. You can ask lots of questions. We've got a tremendous amount of knowledge in that group, from viewers who have a lot of art experience all the way down to people that have little to no experience that just love art and want to learn to do it. So it's a great place to learn, I think. And you know, I mean, I think that we've had a lot of people that probably would not have been as inspired and done as much artwork if it wasn't for being part of the group and a lot of people becoming friends. So, so we'll put those pictures up in there once we're all done with this. And I guess that's it. Next week for JL90, we are doing a mixed media artwork piece. It's going to be done in stages like a cooking show, so each stage will be doing some part of it and adding on to it to produce a final piece. So that's going to be pretty exciting. I would definitely say tune in for that, because it's going to be, we're going to be using acrylic wash, some watercolor, gel medium to do some gluing on things, using all sorts of interesting findings. It's going to be just very unlike anything that we've done. It's kind of like journaling, but not. And so that you actually are getting a finished, more like a gallery type of piece than just cool stuff in a journal. So, all right, well, get better, ladies. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you next week. I can drink my coffee.